Warning, this is not a podcast for those who have got it together. We are men seeking answers to the questions that have plagued our mind. Can we be undefeated?
Thank you, guys. We welcome you to our podcast, which is Positively Undefeated. I'm here with Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hey, Burl.
If you guys haven't had a chance, I want to say check out our website, evenoneless.com. I think we've been doing a lot of work on that. It's starting to, I think, provide some resources. And I mean, it's a work in progress, but it's a great way to connect to us because you can do through. This is one way is through our podcast, but I think through our website, through email, it also, you'll be able to contact us through that. We've posted some blogs on there. What else?
Oh, the directory's been a big thing.
Yeah.
Working behind the scenes, a lot of behind the scenes work going on right now to plug in to the homepage. So a lot of it is not live in action. It's being built. But this directory I'm really excited about. And I think communities all across the western part of Oklahoma are getting really excited about this directory.
Yeah.
Because we have resources. We do have resources, and we have resources that are being developed in real time in the works. And a challenge that we have when we need these resources, we're finding as communities that we don't know what they are, who to turn to. Mm-hmm. Google searches aren't getting it done. Maybe we're not in a social network or circle where people are familiar of these resources.
Yeah.
And so we're just not getting connected with them. So part of Even One Less's goal, a big goal, is to gather and get those resources out there. So when people are in need, whether it's crisis or just improving an area of their life, we've got that resource for them, nonprofit, for profit. We want to work with people, collaborate, have partnerships with the nonprofit as well. So,
well, and it's funny because as I think we're going down this journey, you're starting to see like there's some groups and organization and people that like rise to the top in certain areas.
Yes.
It's like almost they're experts in those certain areas that it's really untapped because, we talked about a local pastor here who's doing, work that I had never heard of. And I think a lot of people have never heard of. And it's like, man, that's a untapped resource. And I think that's one of our goals is to really, to be able to, tap into those resources, make people aware.
Yeah.
Awareness. I mean, because there's some people that do really good work.
Absolutely.
And yet not everybody knows about it.
Yeah.
And so, and you don't know that you need it until you need it.
Right. You're not premeditating. You're not gathering your own resource list for when the time comes. Typically, it's just you need it and you need it now. And we're finding a lot of things that are still in the cracks and still waiting to come out from the underground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys don't know, those who are watching, it's like 30 degrees in here. So I'm like, but our heater's not working. Hopefully we'll get that fixed today.
Hope so.
I know.
Yeah.
So you and I were in the middle of a discussion. I was like, let's push record. But, I think we were talking about really, our organization, and we're talking about like, just kind of our direction and what we're doing. And part of it, some people might think it was a negative, but I think it's a positive, is that we are developing as we're going, kind of all of our message and what we're doing. And I think that you and I are in agreement that we want to be unique and we want to be different, but we also want to be impactful
and effective.
Yes. And sometimes like, right from the beginning, Emily, I was like, I do not want to just have some, organization that is fluff, that is just, we're here, but we're not really making an impact. We're really not. And I think that, that's both of our goals. It's like, we really want to help people.
Absolutely.
And I love our name because, it's not like we're trying to save the world or even one person, but what we're trying to do is if we can make a difference in even one person's life.
Right.
And I think it's very, I don't know. Here's the way I think about it. It's like, man, I've noticed though, us talking about these things, us trying to figure it out, that I'm helping myself. Like I'm thinking about my own stuff and thinking about what impacts me. And I'm thinking about what has changed my life. And I think that's really what I wanted from the beginning. It's like, I want to be able to help other people for sure. But I see that the flip side of that is I'm helping myself too. I'm actually, thinking about things I never thought about before. So
I think that it's only through helping others that we can truly help ourselves.
Yeah. You and I were talking about like knowledge, and one of the things that I think that I was prompted through a message that I heard recently, which was, and I heard like 75% of the message that I heard was really based on the problem. And I think that no negative towards this speaker or whatever. I think he did a great job, but it was a great reminder that, it's easy. I think we all know the problem. We may not be able to perfectly define the problem, but what I've noticed is like, honestly, if you're really honest with ourselves, then we start to see that we know the problem. We know what the problem is. And yes, it's nice to have people help us to be able to navigate what the problem is, be clear about the problem, be honest about the problem. But I think we're short on solutions. I think that what I see is that you can have a message and it's very, they are very articulate about what the problem is and tell stories based on the problem. And we understand the problem, but yet a lot of times, especially when we're in the midst of a problem or we're struggling, then we are really searching for solutions. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's the whole thing. What do we do? What do I do? It's like, let's say I'm depressed. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to like say, here's the 5 steps to become undepressed, because that just seems like it's fake kind of. Mm-hmm. But on the same point, it's like, if I'm depressed, I want to know, what can I do to get out of this?
Right. That's
the real question. It's like, I know I'm depressed, or I know I'm maybe addicted. Maybe I have some addiction issues, depression. Maybe I'm grieving. It's like, what do I do? And, I used to make fun of it kind of, because I'd say, I call it the doo-doo. Like, because it's like, there's not always a clear answer on what you should do.
Sometimes waiting, being still.
Mm-hmm. I think that you have to sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not always in the do.
And we were talking about like self-knowledge. It's like, I think that it's easy to believe that we need to like basically learn more. But sometimes I wonder if we miss the mark because we just become so, educated in self-help that we may miss the mark. I think I'm like the most, I tell this story a lot where I like did this assessment for a job that I was applying for. And they asked me to do like this personality test. And when I did the personality test, the results came back and I was like, I didn't like the results. And the reason I didn't like it, because what it says is I'm one of those people who self-help. In other words, it was like this vicious cycle of self-help. I'd read more self-help books than probably anybody that I know. Mm. And yet it wasn't helping. I was continuing this cycle.
There's so much self involved in that.
Well, but and also it's like self-improve. And there's a part of like what we're told is that that it's always good to self-improve. Mm-hmm. But somehow through that, all that self-help knowledge, it wasn't helping, and I think, that as we talked about, we can do the same thing with like Christianity and reading the Bible. It's like, we can know the Greek and the Hebrew we can know all these things, but is that knowledge, that self-knowledge, that knowledge of deep knowledge, is that really making an impact in our lives? And I don't know if it is.
Right. Does, you know, the growing of the mind, the understanding's all well. And a lot of fear has dissipated in my life through understanding. But this knowledge that you're talking about, it's focused on the brain. It's focused on the mind, and what you're needing a solution for is a matter of the heart.
Yeah.
And so it actually shifts the focus away from the, you know, the heart of the matter, which is in the heart. What's in your heart? It's not about what's in your mind. It's about what's in our heart, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the knowledge can lead us astray from what I think biblically it said it was written in our heart. So the answer must be in the heart, right?
Yeah.
Not in the mind. And I was reading the Bible night before last, and sometimes before I go to bed, I'll pick it up and start reading a book. I don't necessarily know what book I'm in or keeping track of verses or things. But I'm always seeking some sort of, you know, message from it. What did I get from what I just read?
Yeah.
And the message was kind of very clear, and it was, here's what we're instructed to do, is to live a life, live it with joy, live it with purpose, an everyday life. Do your works, you know, with honesty, with joy, and with thanksgiving, you know, to God for this life, for this work that we have.
Yeah.
Very humbling. And the message I got was that from just living, the focus is not on to be better necessarily or have all the knowledge, have all the understanding. Just live your life, live it honestly, do work, whatever that work looks like, whatever your skills lead you to in your work, your gifts, your natural talents. Do those things, do it to the best you can, and give glory and thanks to God, you know, for it. And then these, you could call them epiphanies, you could call them aha moments. But these spiritual revelations that I've had have not come from engaging in these secret, ancient, forgotten, need to be rediscovered or new to be discovered spiritual practices. It has come from doing the everyday thing.
Yeah.
And asking God these questions, giving thanks, giving prayers, asking questions to God for what His will is, and then the magnificent revelations, you know, come to me in the everyday things, and then the everyday things become a bigger thing than me.
Yeah.
I know that when think that I'm just doing this or doing that, God's actually probably got a bigger part in it, you know. And because I listen and follow those nudges, miracles come out of it in other people's lives. Changes happen in other people's lives. I think that I'm doing not good enough, right? I'm like, okay, here I am doing this. In my mind, I'm like, I'm supposed to be doing this. This is what I've set out to do.
Right.
My will, right? But then God takes it a different direction. And in knowing that we're called to be of service and help others first and foremost, forget ourselves and help others, and knowing that and following that, the end of the day, I mean, you're talking about looking back at my productivity list. I'm like, wow, miraculous things happened, but I didn't do what I set out to do,
Right.
but God had a plan, and I trusted, and it was through everyday things. It's not like some miraculous supernatural thing was happening. Just being with another person and their everyday things, where they're at in their situation, being honest, that's where God works, and that's where God is, and that's where this knowledge of the heart, it's kind of like the Grinch. You just feel your heart growing, you know, 3 times its size. You feel that spirit in your heart, that warmth, that love opening up, and you're like, okay, this is it. I'm actually a better person, you know, going to bed tonight than I was when I woke up this morning. I didn't have to do anything but live the day and trust when I was needed to help and to do what was within my capacity to do to help.
Right.
Just in that moment.
I think that it's so easy to get caught in self, and it's like, and I understand why. It's like, I've been in that place where they call it self-pity, where you're just like thinking about constantly yourself and what's going on with yourself and how do I, fix this and what do I need to do? And I think the answer to that, if like being in self is like a real acute problem, like it's right now, I've got, that's what's going on in my head, like constant, like a film just continuing going through my head. I think the answer, even though it seems crazy simple, is thinking about other people.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that the only way that you get outside of your own head is you start to think about other people. I told you I've been stuck on this thing where, for the last year, my prayers have not been about myself. Like that was kind of my rule. It's like, I'm not going to pray for myself. I'm going to pray for other people. And at the beginning and still, at times it becomes very mechanical. So I may say, I pray for Emily, I pray for my wife, I pray for my kids, and I name them. And it seems like this very, mechanical thing, like we're almost like a list, and I'm just going down the list, ticking it off. But what I've found is like, as I do that I am getting outside of myself and thinking about other people. And let's say every day I'm praying for my kids. Well, then I start thinking about, something that's going on. Something comes to my mind that's going on with one of my kids. And then, it takes it from a me focus to a them focus. And I was telling you how I had read a devotion. I didn't know why, I needed to do that. I really didn't. I just did it.
I was trying to remember why I started doing that too.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden I read this devotional and it was talking about the fact that we have a tendency to put our will in place of God's will. So for example, let's say I'm praying for finances, or I'm praying about my relationship, or I'm praying that, about work or whatever. Well, we have a tendency to put our will in there and not really think about what God's will is, because we automate, it comes to my head. God wants me to be very successful in this relationship, so he must want me to do this. And I think about if let's say you have two choices in a job and you're applying for a job and you're praying about it. I'm praying about this job. I'm praying about this job. Which job should I take? I think first of all, God will honor either choice. In other words, he's going to be with you with every job you choose. But we have a tendency to insert our own will, insert what we want inside that equation. And I think that when we do that, we go back into ourselves, and then we end up not hearing really what God has to say about that choice. Where really it's our own. And I could see why because God's not audibly talking to us.
Right.
So in our own head, you have our own thoughts going on. You have thoughts that maybe the world or people are feeding you going on. You have God's thoughts in there, but it's all like this kind of jumbled mess. And I think it's so easy to think, well, man, that's God's will, but it ends up being our own will, And so I stick to that. It's not saying that I can't pray for myself at all, but I would say more like a 90-10, like 90% of your prayer life, you're praying for other people. And 10% I'm praying for myself. And it's really, if you had to summarize both ends of the 90 and 10, it's the same, which is your will be done, not mine.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
When we're talking about my kids, I've told you this before, but people listening may have not heard it, but I got, I was really praying about my son because he was making a decision, a life-changing decision. He was really working on stuff and I was praying for him, and all of a sudden it came to my mind. It's like, who do you think? Because I was afraid that he wanted to join the military, and I was just afraid that, God wasn't going to allow that to happen, honestly. I thought, man, this is what really needs to happen. because he had wanted that his whole life. It was his dream. It was his goal. And all of a sudden it entered my mind. It's like, who do you think cares for your kid more than you, me or you, God or me? And that hit me. And if I don't trust God, which there's times where I don't, I don't trust him. Then it's I care about him more. Mm-hmm. But if I'm honest and I'm just really, honest about it, and I say, of course, God cares about him more. Mm-hmm. Well, then I have to be willing to leave it in his hands. But you could see even in that situation, my will could come to the top. Mm-hmm. And by my will coming to the top, I miss God's will. Mm-hmm. And it's like, maybe his plan is for him not to join the military. And yet I can't fathom that that's an option.
Yeah, really. Absolutely. I was praying for a relationship to work out once. And because there was so much time invested and I really wanted that relationship to work out. And that was my prayer. And it was a self-serving prayer. I thought it was kind of a wholesome prayer, mm-hmm. But what I realized was I was praying for this relationship to work out and praying for this other person's well-being, not from a place of purity, but from a place of my own redemption. Well, if this relationship works out, then it means that I am worthy, Mm-hmm. And it was all self-seeking for me to find my own worth and value and purpose. But the day that I prayed for God's will to be done in the relationship, the complete opposite of what I wanted happened. It wasn't in God's will for that relationship to continue. And sometimes I think we only learn in hindsight, why God allowed things or didn't allow things, how God receives our prayers, and responds to them or does not respond to them. Mm-hmm. A lot of that I've learned in hindsight. I didn't know what was going on in the moment. But I used to have terrible nightmares. I would have these awful nightmares. And so what started me on praying for other people and praying for forgiveness, for my own forgiveness towards other people, I was laying down in bed at night and anticipating these nightmares coming. So I naturally just started to pray for other people. And then I would, come across people who had hurt me or caused harms or something. Mm-hmm. And I would kind of get stuck there, So I almost had to force myself to send them loving prayers, wishes of basically whatever I had felt was taken from me from that relationship. For instance, if I felt that maybe I was not respected by a person whose name would come up in my nightly prayer, I would pray for them to experience, respect, to be respected. Or if I didn't feel considered by maybe a person that came up for me, I would pray for them to be met with consideration throughout their day or the next day. And so that in itself felt to me like this beginning of true, real forgiveness towards other people, wanting for them what I felt they had taken from me.
Right.
And my nightmares stopped.
Wow.
They stopped. And I think that rest is a gift from God. And I think anytime in our lives that our rest is disturbed, there's a spiritual matter at that core of why we're not getting the rest that we need. Mm-hmm. And I think forgiveness was that breakthrough for true rest at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I texted you something, a day or two ago, which is, I said, intimacy is about honesty, mm-hmm. not sex. And I think where what I realized is that, we put two core things. It's like, no matter what we're talking about, whether we're talking about like our spiritual need, our mental, our physical, something acute going on. We said from the beginning that some type of community, tribe, or fellowship is like a core, of what we believe is important. And, I found in my own life, whenever I was going through stuff, like I had a tendency to isolate myself.
Yeah.
And I do it. I feel myself wanting to go that direction still. Like if I'm feeling alone, they say that like men, maybe it's everybody in general, when they feel lonely, bored, helpless, those kind of things, hungry is another one, that I have a tendency to want to isolate myself.
Restless.
I want to get away from other people, and I just want to be in my own little world. And I've realized that isolation is really a detriment to me. It's like, it's really the opposite of what, like my head screaming, be by yourself, be alone, don't want to talk to anybody. But I think the answer is the opposite. The opposite is, dig deep, go connect, the connection with somebody, right? And so we said that tribe, community, fellowship, you need that in life.
Yeah.
And I think back, again, on my darkest moments, I didn't have that.
Me either.
And I always say it's this way, is like 50% was my fault because I automatically isolated myself. I think maybe some people could have done better on their part too, but that is irrelevant because I'm thinking about what was my part in it.
Yeah.
And my part absolutely was I wanted to isolate myself.
Yeah.
Right. I wanted, like, I give the example of like, I talked about how I went to a church for 5 years and never made any real connections. And it's easy to blame the church that I didn't make any real connections. But the truth is that as soon as the service would end, I was out the door.
Yeah.
With like blinders on, don't talk to me vibes.
Please don't look me in the eyes.
Yeah, please don't look at me. Please don't shake my hand. Please don't talk to me. I think I've told you this before, but I'll never forget one not that long ago. I walked into church and this guy like shakes my hand and he's like overly friendly. Hi, good morning. And it just hit me wrong. I don't know why, but I was like, and I just had this kind of negative attitude right from the start. But I think that is what I'm talking about, And so we were, through our discussion and planning, we realized that community and fellowship and tribe, we have to have it.
Yeah, it's vital.
Like, it's vital. Yes.
Survival.
It's vital. And really God designed us that way.
Yes.
He designed us in a way to not be alone. I mean, if you take the very beginning, Adam and Eve,
yes.
It's like, it's not good that man should be alone.
Right.
And so, we agreed on that and we said that's a vital part. And so the reason this word intimacy came up in my mind is that I believe that is really based on intimacy. It's like you can have, they talk, you hear about like, we've all felt like we're in a crowd and we feel lonely in a crowd.
Yes.
And it's because truthfully, there's no intimacy.
Yeah.
And so then I started thinking about where does intimacy come from? And we do, we've polluted it and we believe that, we started to believe that intimacy is sex, right? It's like this sexual thing.
And even just a physical thing.
Right. And I believe that actually intimacy creates that tribe. It creates that community, it creates that fellowship. And so then when I was thinking, okay, what creates intimacy? And then at first I said the truth. And I was like, I think a better word is honesty.
Yeah.
And it's meaning that the only way people can truly like get to know me, and I've actually believed this for years, but I just didn't put it all together, which is hearing our story. I can't really even begin to relate to you until I know your story. And the story has to be from a place of honesty, vulnerability. You know what I mean? And so then I'm thinking intimacy is created by honesty, but then where is honesty created? We use these words and then I realize that honesty is created by trust. Okay. And then I'm thinking, where does trust come from? And it's created by safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, if I feel safe when I'm talking to you or to someone, and I feel like you're not going to go, blab it to the world if I am open and honest with you and vulnerable, that you're not going to go, talk as soon as I walk out the door, talk negative. I don't know if you've had anybody in your life that I have a family member that I can relate to this subject, that I felt like the minute I walked out the door, she would be talking negatively about me and what I just got through saying,
Gossip is rampant.
And it's not even so much about if I feel like, man, I opened up to this person and then they automatically talked about it or made fun of it, or, that's ingrained in deep in us. We don't want to be made fun of either.
Yeah. That's why we keep masks on. That's why it's so hard for us to go about in life, everyday life and everyday activities, and be honest. I mean, even the work that we're doing is not honest anymore. Because we're just not honest. There's a fear. You're right. A lack of safe spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then I started thinking about, okay, where does safety come from? And it's kind of like what we're saying is it comes from our testimony.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from our sharing our story. It comes from our experience, and I've been really on that for a while where I'm like, this whole preaching at people or teaching people. I think that what's more powerful is actually our own personal stories.
Absolutely.
Because that becomes relatable. It's like, if I say that I have contemplated suicide, then there's people that can relate to that.
Yeah.
If I say that I'm depressed out of my mind, then people can relate to that. If I talk about that I'm grieving, people can relate to that. If I'm sad, if I'm lonely, if I'm hungry, they can relate to those core emotions that, maybe, it's so much different than, us telling someone almost what they should think. It's like when we talk about what we think or what we're feeling, then, it creates this safe place. And here's where I think that we have to acknowledge is that you may be vulnerable and it doesn't work out. Meaning that I could be vulnerable to someone and it does not work out. Maybe they do make fun of me as soon as I walk out the door.
Right.
But in that years of doing that, years of feeling that way, whether it's real or not real, that creates where we don't want to share our testimony. So, but what we have to realize is that that's where courage comes from. Courage from, I'm going to share my story. Yeah, in the appropriate place. Is it great to talk about, personal problems at work, for example? No. But I'm saying I'm going to allow myself to be vulnerable because I know that I have that I have to fight for that community, that tribe, and that, or, that fellowship.
I look back at the last several years of my life, and I think I had that. I think I had this realization that I had not had those safe spaces. Even in my own relationship I was in, it was not a safe space for me to be honest and vulnerable. Yeah. And it was so heartbreaking. I had found those safe spaces in peer support groups, and controlled environments, at different clinics and things. And that was great. And I needed that. That was so vital. But when that was finished, when my therapies were finished, I was back at home in my hermit mode. What do I do now? That I'm here. Where am I going next? It just came to me that we have to be what we need. Once we experience it, I didn't know that I needed the safe space till I found the safe space in those therapy groups. Oh, this is what I've been missing. Now I can heal, right?
Yeah.
How do I carry that on into my life past these groups, outside those doors?
Yeah.
Well, I had to be what I needed. So I realized I had to be more open. I had to be more vulnerable, take that risk, and start sharing my story. And kind of said, like you said, like at the appropriate place and time. and not necessarily talking. My story also shifted. My story used to be blame. My story used to be, I'm a victim. This happened to me because of this, because of that. I'm feeling this, and so in honesty, I had to look, like you said, at my side of the street. What's honesty is what is on my side of the street only. And so I realized the part that I had played. I realized the role that I needed to shift into to heal. But just stepping out and sharing my story with people helped. Maybe I was in a grocery store and a woman just comes up to me and starts talking. And once you agree to be vulnerable, it's like this antenna's out there. You're like, I'm going to be vulnerable. And this antenna goes out there and people start to come to you. And this woman came up to me and said, hey, I'm going through this relationally. There was some cheating and betrayal. And I was able to just say, I've experienced that same thing. And that's it. I didn't even share my whole story. I just shared, hey, I've experienced that too. And continued to listen to her. And she's like, thank you so much. I just needed a safe space to talk about this. I didn't think it would be in the grocery store, but I just needed, specifically, she said, a safe place to get this off my mind because it's just all that's running through my head. I can't focus on grocery shopping. I can't focus on anything. Just needed to get it out to somebody. And that confession is so important. I think you and I were talking about that too the other night.
Yeah.
Not only is the trust and the safe space and becoming a safe space for somebody and vulnerable, but spiritually, when she was able to, or when hundreds and hundreds of other people have come to me, have been able to confess, what they're going through, it's a huge weight lifted off their soul. It's spiritually what we are instructed to be doing as people in the church.
Yeah.
As a whole. And we're missing that.
Yeah.
We're missing that. We're busy.
Well, I've said it many times. It's like sometimes the last place you want to go to talk about your problems is church.
Yeah.
It's because you feel like maybe they can't relate, but also maybe you feel like they're going to talk about it, or they're going to. I think I see this like in groups as like in AA, for example, where if I really share what's going on in my life in a group setting or into an individual, then they're going to think less of me. Maybe they don't want me to now lead the meeting. Maybe they don't, now they're thinking less of me. And it's like such a dangerous place because if you cut off their being able to share and they're being vulnerable and be of service, because like you take a group like AA, or let's say a Bible study, let's say church Bible study or whatever. Then if they say, well, he doesn't have his life together, so he shouldn't be leading our Bible study.
And that is very, very common.
The problem is that what we're doing is we're taking the work model, which is, a chain of command and authoritative, and we're trying to put it into a setting like that.
Yes.
Where there should be no leaders.
That's right. I think it's biblical.
There's nothing wrong with someone heading up something and helping us, like basically leading the way on a project we're working on or whatever, or leading, a Bible study. But understand, it's like when we start judging and saying, oh, but he's struggling with this, we don't want him to be the leader.
He's not a good enough example for the pure Christian that none of the disciples were.
I think there's two problems with that. The first problem is that, who determines that?
Right.
Who determines that it's not good enough? You know what I mean? And then what it causes is people to not want to share their story, to not be honest. But also it causes another problem is that those people that are a part of that, they don't want to do it either now.
Yes.
They don't want to be a part of that either because, yes, that we're taking that model from from work.
Business.
That who's the big chief, who's the next one. And what we're saying is that person that is leading it has to be perfect, really.
Yes.
But it's all in the eye of the beholder, because maybe they're just struggling with worry. Well, that's okay. I call it politically correct and non-politically correct problems.
Right. That
you know
one
what I mean?
sin is greater than the other.
But also, it's like we don't give God enough credit that He can work it out.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like we feel like we got to work it out. But one of the best things for me has been the ability to maybe lead a meeting like that in spite of my imperfections. Because like if you're talking about AA, if we're talking about, the addiction of alcohol or drugs, then we're saying, man, maybe one of the reasons I stay sober is because I've been in this community where I'm also leading a meeting. You know what I mean? And by the way, leading a meeting doesn't even look like a work meeting or whatever. That's the whole point. It doesn't look like that. It looks nothing like a work meeting. It is sharing. It is, saying this is when we're going to start the prayer, when we're going to start the reading. It's just guiding. That's a much better word. It's not that I'm there to lead. It's I'm there to guide.
Facilitate.
And if God is powerful at all and He's in charge, then why can't we have faith that God can actually handle it?
Absolutely.
Our imperfections. You know what I mean?
I struggled. I struggled for just a short moment, and I don't struggle with it anymore. Because with this gift of like laying hands and healing, with the Spirit of God, I smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
I'm a cigarette smoker,
Yeah.
So imagine how that looks to the Christian, the believer who has this image of one has to be perfectly holy to be worthy of not only receiving gifts from God, but even being able to use them. And they actually, these gifts are actually effective and work in people's hearts and souls and lives. And so I know from experience that I'm not less worthy of using my gifts or people receiving this gift from God because I'm smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
And so where we can get hung up on perfection is when we don't acknowledge God's perfection. I don't have to be perfect for God's perfection to work through me. And I started realizing that, maybe this cigarette smoking, and not to say that I'm like, condoning, yes, smoke cigarettes, whatever. I'm well aware of, the physical risk and whatnot. But at the same time, there's been too many moments where me lighting that cigarette has led to joining another person who is in a dark place in their life. And over that cigarette, we can talk God.
Yeah.
And so God uses everything. I think when I learned, because I was terrified of people who were labeled addicts, or druggies, not terrified of them, but maybe terrified to be in a social setting with them because of how it might be looked if I'm trying to take this path of ministry.
Yeah.
But then you go back to Christ and the Bible and that's just ridiculous, the thoughts I had in my mind. But I have found more spiritual experiences in situations where most Christians would just, they would just, them, that group, I'll stay away from them. And it is indirectly going to and being around these groups of people that are getting labeled and judged, where God is working the most. And making the most transformations in people's lives. And it's not, look, God gave me this new house. Look, God gave me this new car. Look, God gave me this new whatever material thing is in my life. It's like, look, God saved me from death. God brought back my life. I was dead. To me, those testimonies are powerful, and they cemented my faith in God and trust in God, cemented it. It's so unshakable, unbreakable. I wasn't finding that in testimonies before that were just about some sort of material prosperity or fruit that was given from a person's faith.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah. I think that, when you hear, in the Bible, or you hear people talking about that, basically that we're not of this world, Christians, you're not a part of it. It's not the way you think. I think that it comes down, like when I'm listening, one of my favorite preachers, he actually ordained, him and his church ordained me. And, he's not the greatest preacher, speaker. But he is, I'll never forget this, is that, when he walked, he had preached one Sunday, and I didn't even attend it. It was my aunt's church, and I would go there, sporadically as I go visit my aunt in another town, and he would preach and then walk out right to the front of the church, and he would take this big dip and put it in his mouth. Okay. So here's why it relates to me, because I dip. So I had a tendency, especially at that time, and still, for years, would hide mine. I would not take a dip in front of other people. I would do it in the bathroom, or I'd do it, when people wasn't watching. And yet he walks out and he takes this, I'm not talking about a small one either, a very big dip in front of God and everybody. And my level of respect for this man went up tremendously.
He was being honest.
Because I'm not, I'm looking at him and I'm like, such a funny little silly point. And I guarantee there were people who said negative stuff about that. I guarantee it.
Absolutely.
But what I loved about it is he didn't care.
Yeah.
He did not care.
He was at peace with God.
Now, is he preaching that dipping's cool and it's good for your health? No. I mean, he's not doing that. I think I could see a point if he's up there preaching that dipping's good for your health and everybody should be doing it. No, he's not doing that. But he also is not hiding the fact. And I think that, you're talking about the world of vulnerability. It's it's such, just like it's in the eye of the beholder. In other words, if I dip, then I'm probably not going to have too much problem with you smoking, right? You smoke, I dip, so we don't have too much problem with that.
Yeah.
And but think about it, it's something that I don't struggle with. I don't struggle with drugs really, and so, you doing drugs, that might be, that's, and the thing about it is it's in the eye of the beholder, and I think on the same point, it's you got to be careful, because on vulnerability, it's in the eye of the beholder. And I think that there is such a level of bravery there, where you have to be vulnerable and open and honest. Now, again, not to the world, but to a group or a small group of people that you can relate to. And I was thinking about how do you know? I think, we talked about work is not the appropriate place really to air out all your problems, right? But on the same point, I think it depends on what you're struggling with. So for example, you and I talked about that a lot of times we are the least vulnerable, surprisingly, to maybe a counselor. Somebody that we're, and I think it's because we don't believe they relate to what we're struggling with.
Or we fear that assessment.
Right. We fear that they're going to get us locked up or something, I think that if you're dealing with, let's say you're dealing with a struggle that has to do, let's say you're dealing with lust as a man, you're struggling with lust. Maybe the most appropriate person to open up about that struggle is not your wife, because here's the key. It would hurt her. And I think you don't open up at the cost of other people.
Right. And you would know more than I would, isn't there kind of instructions in recovery programs, 12-step programs about how to go about being honest and making amends, unless it would cause someone
Yeah, you
harm.
don't do it if it would cause harm. And I
Yeah.
think it's a great concept because, you know, it like suggests that you like, for example, in AA, that you would go to someone in the program and you would talk about your struggles and what's going on, and you're open and you're honest and you're vulnerable. And I think that there is those kind of struggles. If it's going to hurt the other person, then I think you need to go to, like in that particular case, maybe a trusted friend and talk to them about your struggles and be honest and open about it. And I, you know, we talked about that I believe you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with God. And it's so easy. This is what I thought in the past. Like, God knows it already. He knows everything. But actually to say the words like in your head and say, God, this is what I'm struggling with. It's not for God's benefit. It's for our own.
Right.
You know,
Secrets are what kills the life in our spirit.
well, here's why that's so important, that part with God. First of all, we lie to ourselves. So starting there,
Yeah.
you know, we're not honest with ourselves about what's going on.
I've tried to justify things with God.
And part of it is, you know, you need maybe a trusted friend to help you be honest about what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
And then number two, the reason that you need to tell God this is because those things that you're struggling with have a tendency to cut you off from God.
Yes.
And I confused that in the past because I would think God's never leaving me. I didn't believe that. So when somebody said you're cutting yourself off from God, I'm like, wait a minute, God's not going anywhere, you know, and I'd automatically shut down over that thought. But what I've realized, it's not God's walking away or he's turning his back or he's whatever. It's us. And we know this. When we're really struggling, the last thing we want to do is talk to God about it.
Yeah.
When we're really depressed, when we're struggling with the sin, we don't want to talk to God about it. It cuts off our prayer life. It cuts us off. So, you know, you might have this situation where you're struggling with the sin. So guess what happens? And you don't even realize it. You stop talking to God about it. Okay. And then at some point, and for some people, it's an hour, some people it's a day, some people it's a week or a year, 10 years, they realize what they've done. They've stopped talking to God. And then they say, oh, I'm going to talk to God now. Well, what God wants is the minute you're struggling with it, the minute you realize it, you talk to him about it.
Right.
Again, he already knows it. It's not for his benefit. It's for yours. It's so you don't cut yourself off from God and you leave that communication open. Why? Because more than anything, you need his help.
That's the greatest helper that we have to ask help
think
from.
about it. It's like, it's this word willingness,
Yes.
right? And the willingness is like, I have to be willing to ask for help.
Yes.
I have to be willing to be open. And the minute we're unwilling, which is the other way to say we're cutting ourselves off from God.
Right.
It's like, we have to be willing. Here was my fear. I didn't say this back then, but here was what my fear. I didn't know whether God didn't care or he just wasn't listening. And when I realized that I thought in my head, God doesn't care. There's so many people out in this world, maybe that I'm just one of them, and he does not care. So part of the reason that I was not talking to him about these things that I was struggling with is because I'm like, he don't care anyway. Or he's not even listening. He's got too many things going on. Another way to say is he doesn't care, you know, to hear verses like he knows he can count the number of hairs on your head and he knows how many birds and all this stuff. It's like, I did not truly believe it. You know,
I wonder how many people have that same thought.
And so that was the second part. It's like, I've got to be able to talk to God about it and be honest about it.
Yeah.
Not for his benefit, for mine.
Hey, God, I honestly don't think you care. That's a start.
Oh, it's, you know, saying something just like that is like, wow, you mean, and it's funny because we have examples all through the Bible that like King David did that. Mm-hmm. He there is where he griped and he complained and he whatever. People love to talk about Job and how amazing Job was, but Job complained and griped and about all of it to God.
But he took it to God.
But the key is that what most people miss, they just look at the faithfulness of Job. But what they're missing, the point of the story of Job is not to tell you how great Job was. That story in the Bible is not there so you think of how great Job was. I promise you. The stories are not there for King David and how great he was.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's so easy to say, I want to be like Job. It's so easy to say, I want to be like David. But the stories are there to show you the faithfulness of God, that he can handle it, that he does care, that he was listening. That was the point of it, truthfully.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you think about it as like the same with us, is like we can say that. God, there's a book that somebody gave me 20 something years ago, and I still remember the title, and it was called Disappointed with God. And I can tell you that in the biggest part of my struggle, if I was honest, I was very disappointed with God. Why? Because I thought he didn't care. It's like, I'm a Christian and I am struggling and you're not listening, or you don't care, or you just like, I honestly at some points thought that God would be fine if I crashed and burned and it was all over. And why? I mean, you know what that's called? Despair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard a definition of despair. Despair is thinking that basically tomorrow is going to be the same as today.
Oh, that's good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if tomorrow looks just like today and I'm not having a very good today, that's despair.
Yeah.
If you think God doesn't care and he don't care about what's going on in your life, then guess what? It's despair.
Pretty hopeless feeling.
It's a very hopeless feeling.
Yeah.
And then the last part of that is that you have to find a trusted friend, somebody to talk about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be a group. You need to find a trusted friend to be honest about what's going on in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'll add this in there. You need to find the person, but they don't always look like what we think.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'll say this because I think we use that as an excuse not to do it. I think it needs to be done immediately, quick. If you're struggling with something right now, you need to find it quick. And guess what? It's partly, it's like if I decide if I'm struggling and I say, okay, I'm going to talk to Emily about this. Okay. So I tell you about it and it doesn't work out, whatever reason doesn't work out, then you still made the right decision. Mm-hmm. You made the right decision because Emily, let's say you kind of scoff at it like, oh God, Burl's struggling again. Okay. And that's the vibe I get. Mm-hmm. Like you're just tired of hearing about Burl's problems. That's the vibe I get. Well, we don't know God's ways. So maybe 1 year from now, you are starting to struggle with some of the same stuff and you remember that conversation. Mm-hmm. So even though I think this is worthless, that I went and talked to you about it.
Right.
But we don't know the behind the scenes.
We can't know. We cannot know.
You see what I mean?
And God uses people's sins for good. And that's not just to say like, hey, just go about doing whatever. But I've literally witnessed God using character defects is the word I'm looking for, I think. Yeah. He's used defects in our characters for good, for other situations and circumstances. He can spin gold with disappointment. And so when we look back in hindsight, on those moments, and we see that God is always working, mm-hmm. That helps develop our faith and our trust. What you might have seen as a disappointing moment in that scenario, your vulnerability was scoffed at. Just as you said, God could work miracles not only, in one life, but in two lives from just the act of being willing, vulnerable, and confessing, our own defects, our own problems.
Well, I'll speak to like the men out there about what I'm going to say. I don't say that as in I don't think women struggle, and this doesn't relate to it. I am a man, so I can relate better to men.
And there's a difference. We have differences.
Yeah. And you know, as you and I talked about, like 80% of suicides are men.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
We have people on our board that have had a female in their life commit suicide. So it's real too. And I don't want to downplay that, but I'll say this is that men, in my opinion, were designed for battle. They were designed for it. I mean, I can show you every way in the world that that's true. You know, we love the stories back to King David. He was a warrior. We love it.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the biggest struggle that I see in men is that here we are in modern day world where there is no wars going on, really. Even if you know, we want, it's like, you know, back to my son's example, we want to go to war. You know how many men I know would love to join the military and go off to war and die for their country?
Yeah.
Sounds crazy, but they do. It's ingrained. They will make a Barbie doll into a gun.
Yeah.
So it goes on and on. It's just a proven fact. And so where a lot of us men go wrong, or where we start to really get discouraged, is because as you get older, man, I don't have that war. I don't have that
war as a material.
I don't have that battle. I don't have it. But I can tell you, here's where the battle is. The battle is number one in the mind. We are battling mentally. Okay. And what we want to do, because it sounds super manly, is to be able to just deal with it on our own, and we'll be okay. We don't need anybody. We're just going to be strong men.
A strong warrior.
And what we're missing is the battle's there. I mean, completely there. And you need to share it with another person. You need to be honest with yourself about that. You need to be honest with God about it. And you need to be honest again with another person.
The battle buddy.
And here's where bravery and the courage, as I keep saying that word, because this is where it relates. It relates in, I'm going to do those things despite the results. I don't care if you scoff at me. I don't care if you make fun of me. I don't care if you never want to talk to me again. I'm still going to do those things, because when I do those things, then I open up a vulnerability in a place where God can absolutely make a difference in your life.
That's right. If I'm honest, then I can do the works of God's will. If I'm still in denial or in the dark, God can't do anything with me.
Think about this. It's like, if you are not willing to admit that you have a problem to yourself, that you have a struggle, that you have anything, to God, you're not willing to admit it to God either. You're not willing to admit to the people possibly closest to you. You're doomed.
Yeah.
And it's not God's fault.
No.
And it's not your friend's fault.
Right.
And here's where the fault lies, is that you have to get the courage to be able to be open and vulnerable about those struggles.
And what's beautiful about that is that's something that you do have control over.
Yeah.
That you have control over, nothing else but that. And that is your choice to be willing.
Yeah. I hear, you know, and this is not like this is not promoting rehab or any of those things. But I can tell you, like, whenever, like, when people are struggling, let's say with addiction, they're struggling with alcohol, let's say they're struggling with mental health.
Yeah.
Then they're so afraid. Here's what they'll say is that, how am I going to pay my bills if I go seek help? How am I going to, you know, what am I going to do with my kids? What about my job? What about blah, 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 right? I can't afford it. It goes on and on. But the thing about it is that, can you imagine? It's like but when they finally do it, when people finally go get help, you know what it does is it leaves this complete burden off you. I mean, this is just like, if you're free.
Right.
And yes, it's scary, but you're free. And in that freedom, if you allow it, if you continue that freedom, that same, you know, there's no yoke on you. If you continue that same thought, then guess what? That leads to healing, because You have to free yourself.
The only
first.
responsibility, I remember that beautiful moment after a scary trip to a crisis unit the first time. It was something I had experienced because I lived a fast life in my youth. I was a mother like a month before I was 17. And so my freedom was very brief and not mature. So when I did get to the crisis unit, that was like one of the first things I remember thinking was like, I don't have one responsibility right now except to be responsible for me and what's going on with me. And being terrified, because I was managing multiple businesses and had kiddos, and it was like the dread of neglecting or dropping that responsibility kept me hanging in, even though I was going insane. It kept me hanging in there until the point to where I could not do it anymore mentally. The breakdown happened. The breakdown came. And so there was this peace with not having responsibility, and this peace with only having to focus on that. And so if I had to do it all over again, I would do it the exact same way. Sometimes that's just how it has to be. It's not ideal and it's scary, but there is a rest in that brokenness that removes all the responsibility away from us to get us back to the responsibility of our spirit.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to the initial part of the conversation, is that you cannot truly be in the place you want to be. You cannot truly grow. You cannot truly be content and happy unless you have that tribe, community, and fellowship. And the only way and really think about it another way is like where you're helping other people.
That's it.
But you can't have it unless you have intimacy, and that intimacy just goes all the way down. It tries to honesty, and that honesty is like, first you have to be honest with yourself, right? And then, and only then can you ever find contentment, peace. Like my struggle is that, like, I didn't think that what I was, or when you're talking about me, I didn't think that what I was struggling with affected my kids. I didn't think it did. So for me to go get help, it's not affecting them. So now I'm going to affect them by going in. Now, what a super deception, self-deception,
right?
Because the truth is that I was not present.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? If you're dealing with grief, alcohol, drugs, depression, you name it.
You could be in the same house as them.
Yes, you are literally not present.
Yeah,
okay?
Absolutely.
Because your mind is somewhere else. So it's affecting every one of your relationships, work, family, everything.
Yes.
Friends. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you actually go get help and you actually are honest about the situation, and you do exactly what we've been talking about, honest with yourself, honest with God, honest with another person, then and only then can you really, truly show intimacy. You can really show vulnerability. And then you're really living day to day and moment by moment. And you can be present for your family and kids. And in that moment is real growth. And in that moment is real healing. And there's a part of us that believes that if we did that once, we're cured. No.
Right.
No. We literally have to do it every day.
It's an everyday maintenance.
It's every day. And what does it look like? It's like, we were talking about this earlier. What do I do? What do we do? And the answer is every day I'm honest with myself, I'm honest with God, and I'm honest with other people about who I am, what's going on, about my life. I'm vulnerable. And in that, it also, if you're honest, it creates forgiveness.
Absolutely.
When people hurt you, if you're honest about it, that it's, there's nothing where I think that, can you imagine if you turned to me and said, Burl, the other day when we were talking, you hurt my feelings. Okay. Yeah. There's some jerks out there. I'd be like, I don't care about your feelings, but not most people.
Right.
Oh, I did not realize I hurt your feelings. I'm so sorry.
Right.
So we have forgiveness.
And there's a difference.
And you let it go.
Yep.
Hopefully.
And that opportunity is huge. on the other hand of that, I could go tell 10 other people how Burl has hurt my feelings.
Yes.
Right. And then within a matter of time, you and I's relationship's going to be severed.
Yeah.
Right. And disconnected.
Absolutely.
And so, so that honesty and that confession and handling it as soon as possible, and having that vulnerability as soon as possible, that is the key to, maintaining connection and maintaining relationship. And life is relationship. The quality of our life is determined by the quality of our relationships in our life. If we could have these great accomplishments on the material level for us, we could have these businesses, these things, these material things, these houses, these cars, and this notoriety. But then we don't have good relationships. The quality of our life is crap. We are not feeling good in all of our wealth or material things. We are still lonely, and we are suffering, and we're not well, and we're not whole. Relationship is everything, and there's no relationship truly without that vulnerability and that honesty, that you're talking about.
Yeah, like you said, we talked about at the beginning, we're designed for it.
Yeah.
And even though we don't want to admit it, we're designed for it.
That's why it hurts. And it's like our design is so, like, God is so intelligent when he designed us. Like, God designed psychology. He made it. He made our psyche and our way of being. And it's kind of what I was learning through nonviolent communication was like, if you are feeling something negative, like there is a disconnect. There is a disconnect from the values that God put in us, or how we should be, and connections in there, communities in there. These are all values that God set within us that we need to be connected to life and be connected with Him. And so, so we literally have a meter, and it feels bad. When there is connection and relationship and these values fulfilled, like we feel the positive things, we feel the fruits of the Spirit and the joy.
Yeah.
So we can't get away from our design. We can't get away from it.
I tell you what. So I want to conclude it. We've been on here for a little bit, but let me leave this as a kind of a nugget, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it. Is that I think you got to look for, let's say 1 to 10 is your, like, what's, the activity in your head, the craziness, whatever. 1 meaning you're completely content, you're peaceful in the world, everything's wonderful. 10 meaning that everything's out of control mentally. You're, you're off the roof. You're just there. Okay. Understand that when you hit there, when you start to feel yourself mentally going up, okay? Now, what do you do? What's the most, it's like, I think it's like practical. Let's talk about practical. It's like, I'm feeling it, and you name it. Maybe it's because you've done something, somebody's done something to you, or maybe you're just having like this mental struggle. Maybe you're feeling lonely, bored, helpless, all those things, hungry. Okay. First of all, it's like, and I love how you said is that psychology actually comes from God.
Yeah.
So, this is not like psychoanalytical BS. This is like, let's talk about it. And I'm going to tell you, when you start to, feel yourself rise, that's a red flag for you. That's something for you to be aware of, right? And I think, go back to what we were saying. Number 1, I'm going to be honest with myself. Something's going on, because understand the next thing that most likely will happen is that you're going to want to isolate yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Understand that. That's where it's going. So you're hitting this. So you may just sit in your office at your desk, and you may just contemplate it, a film rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you're going. Everybody looks a little bit different, but understand that that's the basics.
I think that's what we all experience.
Okay.
That's relatable. Yeah.
So here's what I can do. Number 1, I have to be honest with myself. No matter what the feeling is, I got to figure out what's going on.
Identify,
right? And understand that, like, here's what I did whenever I would think, basically, I would brush it off as in, oh, I'm just being stupid. I'm just being silly. There's a lot bigger problems in this world. I'll give you an example. Whenever I would hit that grieving over my cousin dying, I would downplay it. I should be over this. It's been 3 months. Why am I still thinking about these things? That's how I play. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Whatever you're feeling is literally identified. It doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It doesn't matter. It is what it is, period.
Right.
Okay. So number one, identify it. In other words, be honest with yourself about what's going on. You have to think about it. You may have to search. You're looking for what is going on. And it could be simply as I'm hungry. Okay. But understand, identify it. Number two, talk to God about it. Talk to God about it. Number three, talk to another trusted friend about it. Okay?
Yeah.
Do those things. And don't stop. I mean, praying to God about it. Don't stop talking to God about it until you don't feel it anymore. And so,
Right.
so let's say that back to our example of I hurt your feelings the other day. Okay. So what what you're going to do, think about it. It's like, number one, I'm going to identify, whoa, I didn't realize bro hurt my feelings the other day. Number two, I'm going to talk to God about it. Bro hurt my feelings. And if you go on what we talked about earlier, which is I'm actually going to pray for Burl, not myself. I'm going to pray for Burl. I want Burl to get everything I've got. I want Burl to be happy. He's whatever. Pray for me. Okay. It gets it out of yourself. But first of all, you are acknowledging he hurt my feelings to God. Okay.
Acknowledging what I'm
And then
feeling.
number three is you're going to reach out. But in this case, it makes perfect sense. You're going to reach out to me and say, Burl, you hurt my feelings the other day. And let's say I'll blow you off. No, I didn't. Who cares? Okay. Well, then you're going to continue to go through that process until you don't feel it anymore.
That's right.
Okay. And I'm not talking about coming back to me, but I'm
Right.
saying going to God. You're acknowledging it, going to God, going to God. And what are you doing? I'm going to pray for Burl. I'm going to acknowledge that he hurt my feelings, and I'm going to keep doing it every single day until it goes away.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Persistence.
Now, those are a small
important.
example
Yeah.
of something, but I'm telling you, those things work. And you know what you're trying to do, believe it or not, because there is a relationship that's important. You and I do work together. So you do want that community and that tribe and that fellowship because we do work together, right? So that's why that's important. Right. And you're going to keep going. And what we're also doing is like, we're doing all that process, but here's what we're also doing is that we're showing faith and confidence that God can heal that and fix it.
That's right.
Okay, even if I blow you off,
Right.
even if I act like you're full of it, I didn't hurt your feelings, blah, blah, blah. What you're doing in your own actions is you're saying, it's like you're talking about what do I do? In your own actions, you're saying, God, I trust you because I'm going to pray for Burl every single day.
I'm going to
until
give
this thing goes away.
up to you. I'm going to
see
give
what I mean?
this up to you. I'm going to give this remembrance up to you. This trigger I feel up to you.
Yeah.
I'm giving it up to you, and I'm praying that you help Burl too. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, and I'll add one more thing in there that's been a big help to me. Is that if you can realize it doesn't excuse people, it doesn't, yes, you have to set boundaries, but understand this is like, if you can just remember this phrase, we are all human.
Yep.
Okay. We are all human.
Mm-hmm.
And another, I'll tell you one that's even helped me more than that. We are all sick.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back to that, scenario. If you will remember in your prayer to God for me, because I didn't acknowledge, I didn't believe that I had hurt you. If you look back at that scenario and you are remembering that Burl is sick, that Burl is broken, that Burl struggles, that Burl's human. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And what you're teaching yourself is your own forgiveness. You're teaching yourself that, to me, understanding, it's like there's, you've heard expectations can kill.
Right.
If you expect that I'm going to treat you a certain way and I don't, that could destroy you.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially if we work together, we do stuff together, then that could destroy you. The reason that you're doing this process that seems so simple, and by the way, it could all be mechanical. It doesn't have to, you don't have to feel an ounce of it.
That's right.
Okay. You do it mechanically.
Right.
But what you're doing is that you're acknowledging that Burl is human, that Burl is sick and Burl is broken and Burl has struggles too. And that also shows where you have compassion, empathy, where you're putting yourself in my position.
Absolutely.
You see what I'm saying? By praying for me and realizing compassion and empathy and forgiveness, then literally you're helping yourself.
And just imagining what could the other person be going through.
Yeah.
That is empathy. It doesn't have to be fact. What I might imagine you would be going through to bring you to that mood that day in that moment, or that disconnect. Just doing that is empathy, and that helps me to forgive. It's powerful.
Well, I have a friend, and he's an author. He's on the radio, and he has one deal that he does, and I love it. When he talks about forgiveness, and I remind myself of this constantly, is that here's real forgiveness. Real forgiveness is, I forgive Burl even if he does it again.
There you go.
I forgive him.
It's not conditional.
Even if he does it again.
I only forgive you if you'll never do it again. It's not true forgiveness.
Right. And again, the naysayers would say, oh my gosh, you got to, no, I'm not going to let Burl run all over me every single day. I'm going to set boundaries. I'm going to be realistic. But the bottom line is that you are saying, I'm going to forgive Burl, even if he does it again. And you can say, I don't feel like that. I don't feel like I can forgive him. But the answer is, God, I know you have forgiven him. I ask that I forgive him, whether he does it again. And I ask you to help me forgive him, just like you forgive him.
Help me with my anger.
You see what I'm saying?
Sadness.
And you can say, again, mechanical, it may be mechanical, but you do that every day until you quit thinking about it.
Yep.
And you do it.
The proof is in the pudding. It works.
They say it takes about 2 weeks.
Yeah, it works.
So anyway, well, Emily, thank you so much for being on the program. Thank you guys for tuning in. I know it was a little bit longer than normal, but we do want to encourage you guys to follow our podcast, which is called Positively Undefeated. You can find it on any podcasting platform, Apple, Spotify. A lot of people forget about Spotify, but
all the
platforms,
yes.
Google,
and on YouTube.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. But the main thing is, if you could follow it, like it, and even if you could give us a little review, that helps too.
Yeah, tell us what you think.
Yeah, because once you follow it, then every time a new podcast comes out, it notifies you. And, we're trying to do it once a week, but it's also, it's hard. Life sets in, and sometimes we don't have the guest or we don't have the time. So, but anyway, we would love for you guys to tune in, and that helps us because we're trying to get our message out there. We're trying to get the message out there. And really, if you think about everything we didn't talk about, Emily, it's like a message of hope.
Yeah.
It's real, trying to find real solutions.
Yeah.
We're, as we said at the very beginning, we are working through what that looks like.
Right.
And so you can be a part of that journey with us by just, tuning in. Also, you can go to our website, which is evilanless.com. We do post some blogs, some resources, but it also tell you how to reach out to us. You might have a question. I love the idea that maybe somebody could submit a question and ask, and then we could talk about it on the podcast.
I love that.
I think that, if there's that opportunity for us to do that. We're having an event also that I want to start to promote, which is, February 24th. Is that correct?
Yeah.
February 24th. We're going to be in Midland, Texas. We're going to be putting out there on our website, talking about it more. And you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. But we'll be, as we get that flyer and that information out, exactly where we're going to be and what time and all that stuff. But just mark your calendar if you live in the Midland, Texas area, or you feel like that you'd like to travel, because what that is an introduction event. And we're going to have a fun auction. This is actually our second event. Our first event was here in Elk City, Oklahoma. And now we're going to Midland, Texas. And it just gives you a chance to meet us and to be able to understand more about the organization. And also, if you want to help out financially, we're a 501c3. So we would love to take, we love your donations and your help. We want you to partner with us because I think we can make a big difference. And what Emily and I both, we agree on this. It's like, we can't do this on our own. We just can't.
We need the tribe. We need the community.
And we're not all about, give us money. Neither one of us are like that. But we are about like, what can we do to spread this message and do a good job about that? And, obviously it takes resources and money and time and all those things. So we would love for you guys to be involved. And really you're coming in again at a very great time, because you get to see us grow and develop and where we go from here.
And I think what's cool is we're growing and developing in real time based on what is needed.
Yes.
And so we're so much still investigating that and having everyone's help and their input to help us know what is needed is vital for our mission.
I think that's a great point, because we are not so stuck. Like, we have some core values that is important to us. We really do. That's what we talk about a lot. It's like, what is our core values? But yet we're not stuck on how we're going to get there.
Right.
We are very open to it. And we've done exactly that. We started, we will go the route that we're needed. And I think the way you put that's perfect, because it's so true. Because if somebody calls us right now and says, we need this or that, we're going.
That's right.
And that's what we've done.
Yeah.
You were helping somebody last night. And I mean, we're both doing those things as they come up in real time. Mm-hmm. And, I think that that's important, because that also, like, it makes it not just what we think, but what God's putting in a path and what's going on in our life and, all that stuff. So
I love that we're letting God lead this.
Yeah. And it is. It's truly God led.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much. I hope you'll have a great day, and talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Positively Undefeated. If there was something in this show that resonated with you, please share the show with your community. If you want this show delivered each Monday morning to your podcast app of choice, please subscribe or follow. And if you'd like to get a hold of Burl, please do so by going to burlstricker.com/contact.